Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to episode 26 of the Take Your Shot podcast. Of course, as always, I am your wonderful host, Joshua Gitman, and now we are officially in to what is called the second half of the season, even though there are 28 ish or so games left for each NBA team. Technically, after the All Star break, is the official start to the second half of the NBA season, and we are here. And instead of talking about that disastrous All Star weekend from the skills contest. Don't even get me started with that. Anthony Edwards, all that. The dunk contest, a G League player winning again. Nobody showing up. The dunk contest was absolutely a disaster this year. And the All Star game, you can just tell by the score 211 to 182. What was it? It was absolutely ridiculous. We'll get into that in the offseason and how to fix the All Star break. But now let's just get back to basketball. Let's get back to real basketball. And we are going to talk about the storylines and questions we have for each NBA team for the second half of the season, mostly focused on what they can do in postseason play. But there are some interesting questions for each NBA team that I got. Mostly, I'm focusing on the NBA teams that have a shot in the playoffs to actually win at least one playoff series. So I'm going to exclude the Hawks, the Nets, the Bulls. And for the Western Conference, I'm going to give you the 10 teams that are in the play in the top 10, like the 10 teams that are in the play-in tournament at least. But first, before we get into the NBA storylines, let's talk about some breaking news from Brooklyn, where the Brooklyn Nets have fired head coach Jacque Vaughn. Jacque Vaughn was with the Brooklyn Nets as the official head coach for 2 years after the Nets fired Steve Nash at the beginning of last year after a disappointing start. Jacque Vaughn took over. The Nets got back on track a little bit, but eventually Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving both requested out for the Brooklyn Nets. Kevin Durant going to Phoenix, Kyrie Irving going to Dallas, and basically the entire second half of last year for Jacque Vaughn was trying to manage, trying to prepare basically an entire new roster and an entire new core from Mikal Bridges, Cameron Johnson, Spencer Dinwiddie coming back, Dorian Finney-Smith. It was an entire, basically, new starting lineup for the Brooklyn Nets that Jacque Vaughn had to prepare. So it was a little bit of a tough situation for Jacque Vaughn. They still made the playoffs because of their amazing first half record with Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving, but they ended up getting swept by the Philadelphia 76ers. And this year, the Nets have been an absolute disaster. The Nets were 21 and 33, if I'm not mistaken, before they fired Jacque Vaughn. I'm currently shooting this Thursday night. They just lost to the Toronto Raptors in their first game without Jacque Vaughn. And their first game without Jacque Vaughn, Kevin Ollie, the former UConn coach who won a national championship in 2014 and was dismissed from the University of UConn for issues there internally, is now getting an opportunity to be a head coach with the Brooklyn Nets. And my take on the Jacque Vaughn thing, the Jacque Vaughn firing, I think it absolutely sucks because he was put in a tough situation immediately. This is not really a good team. I think Sean Marks, even though some think he's a decent GM, I think he's a terrible GM. He gave up his whole future for the big three, and they don't even control their draft for a while. Houston controls the Brooklyn Nets draft, and then they traded Harden to Philadelphia for Ben Simmons, which has been an absolute disaster for the Brooklyn Nets, and they control Philadelphia, some of Philadelphia's draft capital, which if they have Joel Embiid and Tyrese Maxey in Philadelphia, that's not going to be really worthwhile. So the Nets are in a little bit of a tough situation because you want to build around Mikal Bridges. You want to build the team around Mikal Bridges, but at the same point, you really can't tank because you do not have a draft pick. You don't control your own draft. You don't have draft capital in the lottery. You're getting a pick that's probably 20 through 30 every single year that you don't have your first round pick and you have Philadelphia's first round pick. So it's a really tough situation for Brooklyn. So what do? They did trade Royce O'Neal at the deadline. They did trade Spencer Dinwiddie at the deadline to get Dennis Schroeder. Dinwiddie wasn't playing well. Royce O'Neal, they cashed in for some assets. They are some second round picks. But it's a really tough situation for Brooklyn because you're stuck on this Ben Simmons contract for at least 2 more years, if I'm not mistaken. Cam Thomas is nice, but other than Cam Thomas and Mikal Bridges and maybe some of Claxton, you don't really see a bright future there in Brooklyn. So they're really going to need to hit on a draft pick or trade for a superstar, and I really don't think they are going to trade for a superstar. And even if they do trade for a superstar, most superstars who usually end up on the trading block are superstars who have expiring contracts. And I don't think a lot of superstars would want to play with Brooklyn, especially seeing that situation with Kevin Durant, Kyrie Irving, James Harden go down. I know some of it was not Brooklyn's fault, but again, just looking at how that whole situation came down, that team looked absolutely unstoppable on paper, and it just ended up to be an absolute disaster for Brooklyn. So I don't think anybody really wants to play for Brooklyn. And if I'm the Nets, you can't really trade Mikal Bridges. Like some people may argue to trade Mikal Bridges to cash in the assets, but you really can't do that because you do not have your draft capital. And if you are terrible, you are not going to get your draft pick. You are going to get the draft picks of Philadelphia, as I said, and that team you trade Mikal Bridges to. And I'm assuming if you're trading Mikal Bridges to a team, it's most likely going to be not a rebuilding team, maybe a contender, maybe a team that's buying for another piece, and that draft pick won't be high either. So Brooklyn's just really put themselves in a hole once again. I know Bobby Marks, when he was the Brooklyn Nets GM, he made that disastrous trade, giving up all those first round picks for Kevin Garnett, Paul Pierce, and Jason Terry. That ben- they did it again with James Harden. James Harden declined. He was injured. The Nets. This is honestly down the line. I don't think it's going to be as bad as a move as that 2014 trade for the Brooklyn Nets, because that was probably the worst trade of all time, where Brooklyn could have gotten Tatum, Brown, and others in the draft. But this move might be one of the worst of all time. So Brooklyn in the last decade, their general managers, their decision making in the front office has just been an absolute disaster for Brooklyn. So honestly, who knows what Brooklyn's going to do next? They say they want to build around Mikal Bridges, but is that going to lead to a lot of winning? No, and you're not going to have your own draft capital. So just a very tough situation for Brooklyn. I think it sucks for Jacque Vaughn because he was put in a tough situation. Maybe Kevin Ollie, from his coaching experience, getting this NBA opportunity, takes advantage of it and finds a way to make this Nets team work a little and try to make a play and push passing the Hawks and or the Bulls. But I just don't really see that happening. And the Nets are in probably one of the worst situations currently in the NBA. But now let's go away from the negative and go to the positive. Let's go to some of our intriguing storylines we have for the NBA. We will start with the Eastern Conference and work our way to the West at the back half of the episode. I'm going to try to spend 5 minutes each answering each question, each storyline. And we will start with the number one seed in the Eastern Conference, which currently is the Boston Celtics, not only the number one seed in the Eastern Conference, but rather the best team in the NBA, sitting at 44-12, a comfortable 7 games behind the number two seed Cleveland Cavaliers. Games ahead, of the Cleveland Cavaliers, 7 games ahead of the Cavaliers. So the question is, can anybody beat Boston? Because Boston has absolutely looked unstoppable this year. Yeah, in the Eastern Conference, I'm gonna say no. I think Boston, the way they've been playing this year, they should go out of the East. They should have no problem going out of the East. We've seen them have trouble with a team like Miami before, but the addition of Porzingis has just been really, really looking great for Boston. It looks like Porzingis' size is really going to help Boston. Porzingis is especially when playing against Miami. Porzingis is going to really help stop Bam Adebayo. Boston is big, a taller team, a more athletic team than a team like Miami. Cleveland, well, we're not really worried about them if you're Boston. The Knicks may cause some problems, but Boston's just way too talented. You've got Philadelphia. You don't know with Embiid. Then you've got the Pacers and the Magic, uh, who are probably not going to make deep playoff runs. And then you've got the Heat, who you never know, but I think the addition of Porzingis has worked really well for the Boston Celtics this year, and it's going to be a very hard team to beat. When you got that starting five of White, Holiday, Brown, Tatum, and Porzingis, that looks absolutely elite. I would have liked Boston to get another piece off the bench. I don't know if Peyton Pritchard is going to be that guy as the backup point guard going into the postseason. But again, Tatum brings the ball up, brings the ball up. Holiday can bring the ball up, so that's probably not as big of a concern. I did like the pickup of Xavier Tillman. I think that was a good pickup. I would have liked to see them get one more bench player because their bench isn't that deep. But Boston in the East, they should win, and if they do not win, there will be a lot of questions surrounding that pairing of Jaylen Brown and Jason Tatum. I'm gonna have to say it because if Boston, all this talent on paper, not performing on the court, you could have questions with Joe Mazzulla, but you've got to look at that Tatum and Brown duo because they've never gotten the job done. Boston should get out of the East, and if they don't, it will be an absolute failure for the Boston Celtics. And for the Western Conference side of this, do I think anybody can beat Boston? I think there's only two teams that can beat Boston in the West. I think the Clippers and the Nuggets. I think the Nuggets, the defending champions, I think Jokic can cause Porzingis problems on the defensive end. I think the Nuggets have the personnel on defense to guard Jason Tatum with Aaron Gordon. You have Jamal Murray to potentially guard Jaylen Brown. It's going to be a little tough on Drew Holiday and Derek White. I mean, KCP, MPJ, pick your matchups there. But I think Aaron Gordon as a primary defender on Jason Tatum, Jokic neutralizing and doing better than Porzingis. I think it would be a good matchup for the Nuggets there, and I may give the Nuggets the edge there. And for the Los Angeles Clippers, I think honestly, it's not really a position which has an edge necessarily. I think both teams have a lot of talent. Not really an edge for the Clippers. They're not really an advantage. I mean, you've got Kawhi guarding Tatum. You've got Paul George guarding Jaylen Brown. You've got, oh, really, for the Los Angeles Clippers, you've got Harden on the offensive side of the ball. Holiday will probably guard James Harden there. So I it's not necessarily that the Clippers have an advantage. I just think they have the firepower to hang in with the Boston Celtics in a 7-game series. I don't know who I would pick in that series yet. I may lean a little toward the Clippers in that one, but we'll have to see at the end of the season. But I do think in the Eastern Conference, Boston should cruise through the Eastern Conference. In the West, in that finals matchup, whether that's the Nuggets or the Clippers, I think Boston is definitely a beatable team for those teams who have a lot of firepower and who have matchup advantages there. Now let's move on to the next question. Let's go to the second seed in the Eastern Conference, the Cleveland Cavaliers. The question is, are they a regular season team? Because we've seen the Cavaliers these past few years have regular season success. Remember last year, they got the 4 seed. They were looking really good going into that postseason against the New York Knicks. And all of a sudden, they lose 4 out of 5 and losing 5 games to the New York Knicks, winning only one game, which was game 2 on their home floor. And it was an absolute disaster. Evan Mobley and Jared Allen got absolutely dominated by the Knicks. The Cavaliers couldn't score the ball at all. They weren't really stopping the Knicks when they needed to at the end of the games in the play at crunch time during that playoff series when there actually was crunch time. So Cleveland, are they that big of a threat? I honestly, I'm gonna say no. I don't think Cleveland is really that big of a threat. I just don't trust that Mobley and Allen pairing. I know they've looked good lately. The Cavaliers have looked really good, especially in January, February, heading into the All Star break. They looked like if I'm not mistaken, I think they had the best record in that span. Cleveland did, but I don't trust that Evan Mobley and Jared Allen pairing, especially if you have a perimeter heavy offense and you got to force those guys out to the perimeter. I can really see matchup advantages there. And Mobley and Allen don't really have the experience in the playoffs. Garland doesn't really have the experience in the playoffs. We saw last year Mitchell carrying. The additions of Strus and Niang could help in the playoffs with 3-point shooting. But at the end of the day, superstar players in the playoffs become better. And you look at the playoffs right now, if the playoffs started today in the Eastern Conference, excluding the play-in tournament, you would have Cleveland playing Miami. Would I pick? I honestly, not to be biased, I would probably pick Miami in that series. You've seen the experience with Miami, and if Cleveland ended up playing Miami, you do not want that matchup if you're Cleveland, and if Cleveland ended up playing them, honestly, you could you could arguably make the case that Miami could be favorites in that series. Cleveland doesn't really have the and even if they do get past Miami, I don't think they have the offensive firepower to hang in with Milwaukee or Boston. I know Milwaukee has had their issues, but I don't think they can hang with them offensively, even though Cleveland does have a outstanding defense and they do have the bigs to match up with Giannis and Brook Lopez. I still don't think they can hang in with Milwaukee. I think if they played the New York Knicks, I think the New York Knicks have shown time and time again this regular season and the postseason last year that they have a very good game plan against the Cleveland Cavaliers, and we've seen them beat Cleveland. I would pick the Knicks in a series against the Cavs. I would pick the Bucks. Obviously, we're going to pick Boston in a series against the Cavs. I would pick the Heat. You could make the argument you could pick even the 76ers with their issues against Cleveland. So I just do not really see Cleveland as a threat in the Eastern Conference. And whoever gets that 7th seed in the Eastern Conference, whether that's Philly if they drop a lot, Indiana, Miami, or Orlando, that could potentially be a first round upset. So I'm not really on that Cleveland train just yet. Moving on, though, let's talk about the current 3 seed in the Eastern Conference, a team that has, let's just say, had its struggles, the Milwaukee Bucks. The question is, can the Milwaukee Bucks solve their issues before it's too late? Milwaukee, in their last 10, in Doc Rivers' first 10 games, they are currently at a terrible 3-7 record. And to end it, they had an absolute terrible last 2 games before the All-Star break, losing to Miami by 26 at home without Jimmy Butler and Terry Rozier, and losing to Memphis on the road. Memphis with all their injuries, and even someone who's been healthy most of the season, and Jaren Jackson Jr., he was out that game too, and Memphis still won that game. So for Milwaukee, this new era with Doc Rivers and these past 10 games have been an absolute disaster. And can they fix their issues on defense? It I think I don't think they're going to fix their issues. I think if Milwaukee's going to win playoff series, it's going to be from the offensive side. I still think they can win playoff series. I still think could they make the conference finals? Absolutely. I don't think they're going to beat Boston because of their defensive issues. Their pick and roll defense is absolutely terrible. They do not know how to guard the pick and roll at all. When they do their drop cover, they do drop coverage pick and roll systems that are on defense that are absolutely terrible. Doc honestly has put in a lot of the blame on his players when some of the responsibility is on you. Doc is complaining a lot about coming into the middle of the season, but I understand why. It's a tough thing to come into the middle of the season with a new team running a new system that you think will help them succeed. But at the same point, you decided to take the job. So I don't think Doc Rivers should be complaining in that essence. And like the defense just really hasn't been good. They've tried everything. They've tried from man to zone. It's just not working. There's clearly the absence of Drew Holiday now in Boston, probably your biggest rival next to Miami, going there, and Damian Lillard, who has played okay on defense, but obviously nowhere near the significance of Drew Holiday. Brook Lopez has had a drop in defense. Even Giannis sometimes he looks like in transition when other teams are pushing the ball, has no idea what they're doing. And if the problem is when Milwaukee gets turnovers, which they get a lot of, they are one of the worst teams in transition defense. They foul all the time. They're giving up 3 points at the free throw line. And honestly, there's just really not a lot to fix there. Like it's not even a coaching thing. It's some of it's not even coaching. It's honestly some of it's just a will to play defense, and Milwaukee has not shown it all season unless they have something to fix, some miracle at this second half of the season, the last 28 games to go. I just don't really see it happening. I think if Damian Lillard and Giannis get on teammates to play harder, I think they can do a little bit better. I think they can win more games and potentially get the 2nd seed and still win playoff series. But when it comes down to playing an elite team in the NBA like the Boston Celtics, I just think Milwaukee has no shot. Even the New York Knicks, that would be a tough series for me to pick. I don't even know if I would pick the Milwaukee Bucks in that series currently because their defense has been absolutely terrible. And New York has one of the best defenses in the NBA that can neutralize the Bucks offense to an extent. So Milwaukee, I don't think they're going to fix their defensive issues. Do I think they're going to make the conference finals? Yes. Do I think they're going to beat a team like Boston? No shot. And speaking of teams making to the conference finals, the question I have for the Knicks is exactly that, something they haven't done in a long time. Can the New York Knicks make the conference finals? And this season is really their best shot to do that. I absolutely do think the Knicks can make the conference finals. This is their best chance. They have their best roster in years, even better than the 2013 roster. Honestly, you could make the case that this is the New York Knicks' best roster in over since the 1900s, since the 1990s. 1990s, the Knicks have their best roster with you've got Brunson, who's your best player, who is looking like an absolute superstar on the court. You've got Randall Anunoby. You just traded for Burks and Bogdanovich. You have DiVincenzo, who has had a career year. You still got Josh Hart. You've got Achua, who's played really well. You've got Hartenstein, and you never know if Mitchell Robinson is going to come back for this New York Knicks team. So this New York Knicks team, in my opinion, is the best New York Knicks team I have seen since the Patrick Ewing era in the 90s. Since that 1999 8-seed run, this is the best New York Knicks team, and this is the most hope I have seen for this franchise, who has gone through a lot in the past 20 or so years. And right now, the Knicks are on a little bit of a skid. They did have an impressive win in Philadelphia tonight, as I'm shooting this on Thursday night, beating the Sixers. But before that, they had a 4-game losing streak. Currently, if they are at the 4 seed, they're a game behind the Milwaukee Bucks. They are a game and a half now ahead of Philadelphia, 2.5 ahead of Indiana, 3.5 from the play-in. So it's a little competitive. Like the New York Knicks, if they don't stay healthy, they could potentially drop to that play-in spot. So it's going to be a little bit tricky, and that schedule for the New York Knicks doesn't really get a lot easier. And honestly, you may want to drop to, I'm not saying you may want to drop to the play-in, but being in that 4 or 5 seed situation is probably not the most ideal thing, considering who the number 1 seed is. And if you are in that 4 or 5 matchup and you're playing Philadelphia, that's not really an easy matchup. If you end up playing Miami in a 4 or 5 matchup, because Miami has one of the easiest schedules and can start winning games, that's not an easy matchup. And then you got to play Boston. So honestly, I wouldn't panic right now with the injuries for the Knicks. It may be a potentially a good thing at the end of the day, but getting that 6 seed, staying out of Boston's side of the bracket until the conference finals, because that's really the only way I can see them actually making the conference finals. If they can push to the 3 seed or even drop to the 6, potentially the 7 seed, if the injuries are just too much for the Knicks to overcome. But this team, this firepower that they got on offense now with Bogdanovich and Burks, which I think is a little bit under the radar. I think that firepower with both of those guys coming in is really going to help a defensive-centric team, helping relieve Jalen Brunson a little bit of the scoring duties, and hopefully the Knicks can stay healthy. There was a little bit of shaky news. OG Anunoby and Randall might not even be back until the start of the postseason, which may be a little bit tough on that team figuring out their system, as OG Anunoby is, even though he's played a decent amount of handful of games for the Knicks, it's still a new team. They're still trying to get familiar, playing like OG and the Knicks playing with one another. Now they got even more new players. So with those guys coming in potentially late in the regular season, that could be an issue of concern for the Knicks. But I do think they have the most talent that they've ever had. And I do think if they get the right matchups, if they're on the right side of the bracket and away from Boston's bracket, they could absolutely go on a run. You could easily see every single scenario where they beat every single team in the Eastern Conference except for the Boston Celtics. Now let's move on to the current 5 seed in the Eastern Conference. The team the Knicks beat tonight, as I said, the Philadelphia 76ers. The question we have, will it be too little, too late before Joel Embiid comes back? And the answer to that is absolutely, it will be too late before Joel Embiid comes back. Philadelphia currently is on a major skid, losing 7 out of their last 10 games, having now on a 2-game losing streak, losing to Miami before the All-Star break, losing to New York tonight. both of them at home, and both of them were winnable games that they lost. Kyle Lowry made his debut for Philadelphia tonight. Really just looked like the Kyle Lowry from Miami, not really doing much. I don't think he's going to make that. He's going to make an impact, but not a significant impact for that Sixers team. Obviously, as I said in the past episodes, Buddy Hield has been playing absolutely amazing for Philadelphia, but that's not really going to make a difference because this team relies so much on Joel Embiid and his play, not only on the offensive end, but the defensive end. Even though Paul Reed's a decent backup center, you can tell the difference that big big guys on other teams are attacking Paul Reed in the paint, and that's something they would not do against Joel Embiid. And if you attack on the paint, it opens up a lot of floor space for shots in the corner threes, kick and dish when the paint collapses because you have a matchup advantage in the paint. So it's going to be very tough for the Sixers, especially on the defensive end. I think it's more of an impact there rather than the offensive end. Even though you are giving up 35 points per game on the offensive end, I think the defensive end will take a much bigger hit for the 76ers. Maxey, he could hold the fort down, but in reality, you're only a game back from the 6th seed. You're a game and a half back from the 7th seed. And looking at Philadelphia's schedule, seeing the teams that they're playing in the second half of the season, it gets a little bit easier for a little while, but it's not going to be the easiest of schedules going down the stretch. They still got to play. Their next 3 games. They've got Cleveland, Milwaukee, Boston, which is probably 3 losses for the 76ers there. You still got to play New York 2 more times. You've got to go on a West trip where you play Phoenix, both LA teams, Sacramento. Then you come home, you play LA. You've got to play Cleveland at least a couple more times. You've got Oklahoma City in there. It's really not an easy schedule for the 76ers down the stretch, and you could really see this team piling up losses and potentially getting all the way down to the play-in, and potentially it could be too little too late unless Embiid comes back and they do get the 7th seed. But even if Embiid comes back, though, and they do get the 7th seed and they do get that matchup against Cleveland, which I think they could win in a 7-game series, you're going to have to integrate Embiid back to this team. You're going to have to play through Embiid again, which is going to be tough because now you basically, Philadelphia, are playing this whole new offensive system revolved around Tyrese Maxey setting up other players to score the ball and revolving the entire offense now around Tyrese Maxey instead of Joel Embiid. So it's going to be an adjustment. You're going to have to adjust your game. And when he comes back at the end of the regular season, when there's only a few games before the postseason, it's going to be a tough adjustment before the postseason. So you could really see problems with Philadelphia in the postseason. Even if you think they're going to win, they may not because they have to get adjusted back to that centric Embiid offense. It's not easy to switch from offense to offense throughout the season in the NBA. It's just not an easy thing to do, and it's going to be tough for the Philadelphia 76ers in that case. They still could win their first round if they do get that Cavaliers matchup, but it's just tough for Philadelphia because they are really going to probably start piling up a lot of losses. Moving on, though, let's talk about 2 teams that are up-and-coming young teams in the Eastern Conference, the Magic and the Pacers. The question is, can they do anything in postseason play? Unfortunately, I'm going to say no. If I had to pick a team that would do something, I would say the Indiana Pacers more than the Orlando Magic. But they're both very young teams who have not really had the playoff experience that they need to have to actually win a playoff series, and most likely they'll range from the 5, 6, 7, 8 slots. And again, unless you get that Cleveland matchup, I really don't think you have a shot. And even if Indiana and Orlando do get that Cleveland matchup, I would probably pick the Cavaliers still in that series there. It's going to be tough to beat the Knicks if you're the Magic and the Pacers. It's going to be tough to beat the Bucks, the Celtics. It's not going to be an easy path for the playoffs, and I just don't really see the Magic or the Pacers doing anything. The Magic I could see getting swept or losing in a gentleman's sweep. Pacers could potentially keep it competitive in a first-round series, especially for their scoring ability. one of the most historic offenses of all time in the NBA this season, number one offense. And if you have that good of an offense, you can probably hang with any team. But in the playoffs, the defense does get a little bit tighter. The shots get a little bit harder to get. So it will be tougher for Indiana in the playoffs. But if you have that offense, you can hang in with any team. But I just don't really see them, either of those two teams, getting past the first round. They're both are two nice and young teams that are on the upcoming, and they both have bright futures with their franchise players: Indiana, Tyrese Halliburton; Orlando, Paolo Banchero, and they still have other young players there as well for Orlando, and Indiana. Like Indiana's got Mathurin, and Orlando's got Franz Wagner, for example. They've got nice young guys who they can build around as well down there in Indiana and Orlando. So both are very good teams, but I just don't really see them doing anything in the Eastern Conference. Both of them do have easy schedules the rest of the stretch. They I wouldn't be surprised if they were the 5 and the 6 seed finishing in the Eastern Conference, no particular order. But I just still, looking at the matchups with a New York or a Boston or a Milwaukee, and looking at their playoff experience compared to other teams' playoff experiences, I just don't really see it happening in the playoffs. Now let's move on to the current 8th seed in the Eastern Conference. This is a team that is pretty familiar in that situation, the Miami Heat. Can they do the unthinkable again? That is the question. Can they make a run? They can't be the 8th seed. If you're the 7th seed again, I'm sorry, Cleveland, for the hate. I like the Cavs team. I think they're a nice team, but I'm going to give more hate to Cleveland. If Miami gets that Cleveland matchup as a 7-2 matchup or a 3-6 matchup, I would pick Miami in that series as a non-biased NBA fan, seeing what Miami has done in 3 of the past 4 years in the playoffs, seeing what Cleveland did last year in the playoffs, looking at both teams' playoff experiences and who is the best player on that series, which is Jimmy Butler. You go down the list, you probably got Butler, then you've got Donovan Mitchell, then Bam. So Miami's got 2 of the best 3 players in that series. I would pick Miami in that series. Miami could definitely make the run again because Miami's not scared of any team in the Eastern Conference. They beat Milwaukee last year. They beat the Knicks. Not scared of the Knicks. They're definitely not scared of Philadelphia. They're not scared of Indiana or Orlando. They're definitely not scared of Cleveland. Clearly, they're not scared of Boston. Miami is not scared of Boston. And I wouldn't be surprised if Miami goes on the 6-game streak in the regular 7-game streak in the regular season. We're like, oh, here's Miami again. Miami's on the upcoming. Here they go. They're going to ramp it up for the playoffs because Miami, at this time, this late February, early March, they start ramping up. They start winning games consistently to prepare for the playoffs. They're starting to get in that playoff mode. And Spo has great game plans for this team. And I believe this team, with their defense, with their new offensive firepower and Terry Rozier, can absolutely have the potential to make a playoff run. Am I going to pick them against a team like Boston? No. Am I going to pick them against Milwaukee or the Knicks? Maybe, but most likely not. Could they beat all 3 of those teams? Absolutely. Should they? No. But are they going to find a way to do it? Probably. And we're all going to be surprised once again that Miami is in the finals again, or at least the conference finals. But again, I would not be surprised if Miami at least makes the conference finals and wins 2 playoff series, especially if they're in that 2-7, 3-6 side of the bracket and they avoid playing Boston. Because if I think they avoid playing Boston in that early playoffs, I think they would be comfortable. If I'm Miami, though, I do not want the 7th seed. I probably want to get the 6th seed and stay out of the play-in. But you never know with Jimmy Butler in the playoffs, because all of a sudden Jimmy Butler turns into a top 5 player in the playoffs. So I believe Miami could do the unthinkable again and make another run and potentially make the finals. I give them a small chance because Boston looks really good. Porzingis might be able to contain Bam and outscore and outplay him in a series. But you never know with that team. That they're coming. They're coming. Them goons from Dade County, they are coming. But let's move on to the Western Conference here. We've got a decent amount of teams that can actually contend in the Western Conference, make runs in the Western Conference. But before, let's start with who I believe the favorite in the Western Conference is going down the stretch. Currently, there's two teams who I think could win the Western Conference. I've already mentioned those teams when I talked about Boston. You've got the Nuggets, who are the defending NBA champions. You've got Jokic, the MVP. You've got Jamal Murray, Aaron Gordon, MPJ, KCP, and them boys, Braun off the bench, and them boys in the Mile High City. Then you've got the Clippers, who have looked really, really good after acquiring James Harden, have had the best record in the NBA since that point. They have Kawhi, obviously, Paul George, Harden, as I just said. They've got Westbrook, Norman Powell, Ivinka Zubac, Terrence Mann, Westbrook. They've got a lot of firepower, not only on the defensive side of the ball, which Kawhi and Paul George, we know they're absolutely studs on that end, but also the offensive end as well. So the Clippers, on top to bottom, look like they have the best roster. If I had to pick between those two teams, it's tough because you look at that Jokic matchup against Ivinka Zubac, and even though Zubac can't play defense, that just looks like a major advantage for Denver. But if you do let Jokic beat you and you contain the other guys, if you're the Clippers in a theoretical 7-game series against the Denver Nuggets, I would say the Clippers could win that series, and the Clippers may win that series. And I'm leaning toward the Clippers this year. I know Jokic is absolutely incredible. Murray's incredible, but I think the firepower that the Clippers have, the defense that they have played, their coach in Tyronn Lue, who I arguably believe is a top 3 head coach in the NBA behind Greg Popovich and Eric Spoelstra in Miami. They have the coaching, they have the team, they have the championship experience with Kawhi Leonard, and they have the depth to compete with anybody, not only the Nuggets, but anybody in the NBA. And I don't think it matters that they have home court. If that Clippers team stays healthy, they should be the favorites in the West, and the Clippers should win the Western Conference. And one key factor to that is not on the Clippers side, but going to the Denver side. The Nuggets lost Jeff Green and Bruce Brown. Those are big, big losses for Denver because those two were major factors in the Denver Nuggets championship run last year. Jeff Green had a resurgence. Bruce Brown was an incredible 6-man. Now, off your bench, you've got Reggie Jackson, who's had actually a decent season for the Denver Nuggets, and Christian Braun, who was there last year, playing good as a rookie off the bench. But you've got Justin Holiday, Peyton Watson, DeAndre Jordan. Is that really the rest of the bench that you want to see on a championship team? Not really. I would have hoped that Denver could have potentially gotten somebody else in the buyout market, potentially a Thaddeus Young to replace a guy like Jeff Green, but Thaddeus Young went to Phoenix. Potentially like another backup big probably is what I wanted to see for Denver. But they didn't get that in the buyout market. They didn't do anything at the trade deadline. They're staying intact. They're running basically it back without the two guys that I mentioned in Brown and Jeff Green. But I think those two guys are going to be huge at the end of the day for Denver. And I think they're going to realize that especially if they lose a series to the Clippers and potentially maybe somebody else in the Western Conference. But the way the Clippers have played with Harden, Kawhi, and Paul George, I really have to lean toward the Clippers as my favorites in the Western Conference. Now let's move on to two teams that are ahead of both the Los Angeles Clippers and the Denver Nuggets. Teams that are number 1 and number 2 in the Western Conference, the Minnesota Timberwolves and the Oklahoma City Thunder. Are they actual true contenders? Let's start with the Oklahoma City Thunder first, the current 2 seed in the Western Conference, 38-17. They have been absolutely balling out as of late. They just blew out the Clippers tonight, 129-107 at home. They really made a statement win there. They've had a lot of statement wins this season. Under Shai Gilgeous-Alexander playing like an MVP, Mark Danlut's coaching, the emergence of Chet Holmgren as a Rookie of the Year, Jalen Williams having an excellent sophomore season, Josh Giddey playing good, the acquisition of Gordon Hayward, who hasn't played yet for the Thunder, but will be a key factor for them. Guys like Isaiah Joe off the bench for offense, Lou Dort starting for defense. The Thunder have a very, very good team and a very, very good team that can compete in the Western Conference. And it's going to be tough. Like, if the playoffs started today, they would play the Phoenix Suns. I would pick Phoenix in that series. But could the Thunder win that series? Absolutely. I think the Thunder are true contenders in this Western Conference. And if they get the right matchup, and they stay as a 1 or 2 seed in the Western Conference, they, again, even though they may not be the better team, they still have home court advantage, which at the end of the day is a huge factor in playoff series, and it matters a lot, especially in a crucial game like a Game 5 when it's a 2-2 series. And obviously you've got Game 7 at home as well if that's necessary for a team. So the Thunder, if they can get home court advantage, I think the Thunder are actual true contenders. I wouldn't be surprised if they snuck into the conference finals. Championship, no, but a contender who can make noise in the Western Conference. And could they make the finals? Absolutely, they could make the finals. I'm not giving them a 0% chance. I'd give them maybe like a 5% chance in the Western Conference to make the finals, maybe 5 to 10 if I'm being nice. But there is a possibility of them making the finals. I don't see it, but it is a possibility, and they have a very, very good team. And I think right now they look like the third best team in the Western Conference. And if I had to go down the list of Western Conference contenders, I would probably put them at third. Minnesota, I'm not really as high on as others on this Minnesota Timberwolves team. Anthony Edwards playing an absolutely amazing season, looking like an MVP out there. Gobert, even though we saw his amazing defense in Utah, this is probably his best defensive season ever. Karl Anthony Towns actually playing defense. Anthony Edwards is getting that defensive dog out of Karl Anthony Towns and playing really good on that side of the ball, which has really pushed the Minnesota Timberwolves to success so far in the regular season, only giving up 106.5 points a game, which in today's NBA, when teams score over 100 every single day, that's pretty impressive if you're Minnesota. That is very impressive if you're looking at the playoffs. When you're looking at elite offensive teams and you have a great defensive team like that, that's very impressive. But I'm going to say Minnesota is not a true contender. I would probably pick teams over Phoenix, Dallas, potentially even LA or Golden State over the Minnesota Timberwolves. I'm not really high on them. And depending on who gets that 8 seed, honestly, the way we saw Miami beat a 1 seed last year, I wouldn't be surprised if the 8 seed in the Western Conference beat the Minnesota Timberwolves in a first round series. I'm just not really high on them in the playoffs. I see teams exposing the big guys, even especially on the offensive side of the floor. I think teams would probably focus on letting Rudy Gobert beat them on the offensive side of the floor. I think if they get a matchup against the Lakers or a Warriors, a team that can probably have the defensive power to guard an Anthony Edwards and have somebody who can guard a Karl Anthony Towns on the defensive side of the ball and has somewhat of superstars who can actually carry teams to playoff wins, and Curry and James, AD. It, I just don't. I'm not really high on this Timberwolves team, and I think in the playoffs, I think this team may look a lot like what we saw in Cleveland last year, just as a higher seed. So obviously, I think they most likely could win their first round series, especially if they are a 1 seed. But I would look out for that to be a major upset alert, and I'm just really not high on the Minnesota Timberwolves in the postseason. Now, another question. Let's go to a team that currently is the 7 seed, dropped all the way from the 5 seed to the 7 seed tonight after a disappointing loss in Dallas after they controlled most of the first half. The Phoenix Suns. The question is, can they win the Western Conference? It's a tough question because you've got the Clippers and the Nuggets, you've got the Thunder, and even though I just discarded them, you still have the Timberwolves there. I would say the Suns, could they win the Western Conference? Yes, I'd probably give them just probably around the same odds as Oklahoma City, 5 to 10%, because you have Kevin Durant, you have Devin Booker, but Bradley Beal has not stayed healthy this year, which has been a concern his whole career, and I need to see those three play on the court more consistently. and that defense is a major concern. Their bench is not really good, even though Grayson Allen, he's been starting, has a career year. Eric Gordon has played okay off the bench for Phoenix, and they did just acquire Royce O'Neal, and they signed Thaddeus Young off the buyout market. The Phoenix Suns just do not have a really good bench, and at the end of the day, I think that's going to hurt them a lot in the playoffs. I think their defense is going to hurt them a lot during the postseason play, and if you have a high powered offensive team like an Oklahoma City Thunder or like an LA Clippers who matches up against the Phoenix Suns, I do not think that would be a good matchup for the Phoenix Suns, because if you have offensive power teams that can hang in with a high offensive power team in Phoenix, especially with those teams who have way better defenses than the Phoenix Suns, that's going to be a tough matchup. And I think if you can contain Kevin Durant and Devin Booker on the perimeter, and you make them beat you off the mid range and the 2 point game, and you play the offense we've been seeing this regular season, if you're the Clippers or the Thunder, I think that both of those would be terrible matchups for Phoenix, and I would probably pick both of them ahead of Phoenix. It's just really been an up and down season for Phoenix, even though they've won 7 out of their last 10. I'm just not really high on the Suns train. And unfortunately, I picked them to win the title, but they have just not looked up to par so far. Could they make the finals? Maybe. 5 to 10% chance there, but I just don't really see it. I don't see them getting past the Clippers or the Nuggets, even if they do get past the first round. I just don't see them beating those teams. I don't see them beating those two. I don't see them beating Oklahoma City. So it's going to be a really tough path for Phoenix in a 7-game series where defense matters a lot. And can you get a stop against a superstar? You have to answer that question for each team. Do you have a player that can stop a superstar? Do you have multiple players that can stop multiple superstars? And the answer for Phoenix is clearly no at this time, and most likely will be going into postseason play as well. So I don't think Phoenix can really do anything, unfortunately. Now let's move on to teams that are a little bit under the radar in the Western Conference, the current 5 seed and the current 8 seed in the Western Conference, teams that have had successful seasons this year and at least one of them last year in the New Orleans Pelicans and the Sacramento Kings. New Orleans not really having a great season last year. Kings having an amazing season last year as the 3 seed in the West, having that competitive first round series against Golden State before ultimately falling in 7 games at home, where Curry had that 50-point incredible piece. Both of those teams have really, really solid teams in the Kings with their core on Fox and Sabonis, Keegan Murray looking like an emerging third star. You've got the Pelicans, you've got Zion, McCollum, Ingram, Valanciunas. Both of those teams are very good and very under the radar. Do I think they could make some noise in the Western Conference? No. I'm just not really high on them. I think the Western Conference is a 2-team race in the Clippers and the Denver Nuggets, and I don't really see them doing a lot in the Western Conference. Currently, the Pelicans would play the Nuggets. The Kings would play the Timberwolves. Could I see the Kings beating the Timberwolves? Absolutely. I could see the Kings beating the Timberwolves. Do I think they would? Probably not. And I don't really see the Pelicans beating a Denver or the Clippers or the Thunder. Both those teams have terrible defenses, in my opinion. Even though New Orleans has an okay defense, in the playoffs, I don't really think that defense will go up to par. I think Zion will be easily contained. I think Valanciunas will be easily contained. McCollum has McCollum has shown he can play really well in the playoffs, but I don't think they have the firepower to hang in with other high offensive power teams like the Clippers and the Nuggets. The problem with the Western Conference this year is for these teams like Sacramento, for a team, as I just mentioned, in Phoenix, and even New Orleans, who have very, very good offenses. Even a team like Dallas, who has a very, very good offense. The problem is the teams like Denver and the Clippers and even the Thunder in that conversation, who have very good offenses, but they have very good offenses as well, but they also have really good defenses, which is the problem, which is why the West is so tough this year, with especially Denver and the Clippers, because if you have a great defense that can contain a great offense and you have a great offense yourself, it's going to be really tough to win a playoff series. And I just don't really see the Pelicans or the Kings making any noise in the Western Conference. They could be the 5 and the 6 seed. They could get that those Clipper Denver matchups. They could get the 7 and the 8 seed. They could play Minnesota and Oklahoma City, and then both of them could win those playoff series. But I just don't see them. I just don't see them doing a lot of noise in the postseason. Kings, I think they'll just get outplayed on offense. And for the Pelicans, I just don't really think necessarily that Zion's going to do really well in the playoffs. I don't think they're going to stay healthy. The Pelicans have never been healthy. And I don't think they really have, other than those four guys I mentioned in Zion, BI, McCollum, Valanciunas, they really don't have anybody else that's that significant other than those four. So again, I don't really see those teams, just like Phoenix, doing really anything in the Western Conference. Now, our last storyline of the year, we've got three teams in the Western Conference in the Mavericks, Lakers, and the Warriors, who have had, let's just say, disappointing seasons, even though the Mavericks have played well of recent, are now currently sitting 10 games over 500. It wasn't really looking good for the Mavericks early, and it clearly still now for the Warriors and the Lakers, even though they have had some winning lately, have not looked really good for them as well. The question is, could those teams make runs, and who is more likely to go on a playoff run? Honestly, if let's just eliminate one team right now, I'm going to eliminate the Lakers. It's tough to say that I'm going to eliminate the Lakers, even though they do have, obviously, arguably, the best player of all time. I have him as my second best player of all time, LeBron James. And you have Anthony Davis, who is up and down, but when he's up and he looks like an absolute superstar. But other than that, I just don't really trust anybody for the Lakers. I mean, Austin Reeves gives you a game or two there. D'Lo, we've seen his struggles in postseason play. The Lakers really haven't improved their roster from last year. Hachimura hasn't really been healthy. Vanderbilt's out for a while. Cam Reddish, even though he's an okay defender, can't really score. The Lakers just don't really have a lot of scoring options. And I think maybe Gabe Vincent, if he comes back this season, could help that problem for the Los Angeles Lakers. But Gabe Vincent has just been out the whole year, and I don't think he's going to really incorporate with that Lakers system in time for the postseason, even though they got Spencer Dinwiddie also for the Lakers. Not really an offensive player, and just reminds me of every single other player on the Lakers, a walking brick. And I'm sorry I have to say that for the Lakers, and they probably outshoot me every single time. But in the NBA state, the Lakers are just a terrible shooting team. And at the end of the day, if you cannot score in the playoffs, you know what is going to happen, and you're going to lose. So if I had to pick a team that's not going to make a run, I would pick the Lakers. Now, in between the Mavericks and the Warriors, the Mavericks have looked really, really, really elite lately, especially with the acquisitions of Derek Lively and PJ Washington. Mavericks are currently on a 7-game winning streak, 4-game winning streak since the trade deadline when getting those two guys that I just mentioned. Luka Doncic, you know what he can do in the playoffs. The question is, can Dallas stay healthy? Because if Dallas can stay healthy, I think they can make a playoff run. And I think they're the better team than the Warriors. But I'm going to pick the Warriors for one reason and one reason only: seeding position. Because the seeding position this year in the Western Conference matters a lot. The Warriors are currently sitting at the 10 spot, 1.5 games behind the 9, 3.5 games behind the Kings, and but if the Warriors can find their way into the playoffs and end up playing the Minnesota Timberwolves in that 8-1 matchup, I'm picking the Warriors because they have Steph Curry, the greatest shooter God has ever created, and I would pick the Warriors. The Warriors have played really, really good as of late, just like a lot of other teams in the Western Conference. Klay Thompson moving to the bench was a really good move for Golden State. Kuminga has absolutely looked like a superstar. Draymond's back doing his thing. When Chris Paul gets healthy, he'll be an impact. Pajemski has been an absolutely elite player for Golden State, as only a rookie. Wiggins has gotten a little bit better, but still not where he needs to be. But I think Golden State, if that team gets healthy and they play at a high, consistent level with that offense, with that guy at point guard, I'm going to take the Warriors to make a run, only because of seeding. I would pick the Mavericks if they were in the position of the Warriors. And I know it's going to be tough for the Warriors to make the playoffs in general because you're going to have to win 2 playing games, probably one being against the Lakers, the other being against either the Kings, Suns, Mavericks, or Pelicans, which is not easy. But I think the Warriors, if they get hot, which I think they can do, and I think they will do, they are a very dangerous and scary team going into the postseason. And I could see them beating an 8 seed, beating a 1 seed in Minnesota. So if I had to pick, I would pick the Golden State Warriors to make a run. And now let's go to the Take Your Shot top five. We didn't have one last week, but I am currently 5 games under 500, and it's just not really been a good season for the Take Your Shot top five. And we really need to get back on track. If we get 5 out of 5, we will be back at 500, and I hope we can do that once this year. But I hope it's this week. We've got some exciting matchups this week, and we'll start with number 5. Number 5 is going to be I'll call it the Rick Carlisle game. We've got the Mavericks going into Indiana and playing the Pacers, both two highly elite offensive, two of our best offenses in the league at this current state. You've got Luka Doncic, you've got Tyrese Halliburton, you've got that Rick Carlisle factor there. Mavericks are hot. The Pacers have been playing well, and it's in Indiana. The crowd will be elite, but I think the way the Mavericks have been playing, and I think the fact that the Mavericks have those two guys who I don't really think Indiana can guard at all, in Doncic and Kyrie Irving, and even Tim Hardaway Jr. off the bench. I think the Mavericks are going to have the advantage in this one, and I'm going to take the Mavericks in a win over the Indiana Pacers on the road. Mavericks stay hot and win that game. Now going to my number 4 matchup, we've got the Battle of LA. We've got the Clippers at the Lakers. Doesn't really matter. It'll be a Lakers home game no matter what. Clippers have been absolutely steamrolling the league, and the Lakers have played a little bit better as of late, winning 3 straight, 7 out of their last 10. But the Clippers are just a way better team than the Lakers this season. The Lakers cannot stay healthy. The Lakers have offensive issues. The Clippers do not. The Clippers have more firepower than the Lakers easily. And in that one, even though the Lakers may make it interesting, I'm going to take the Los Angeles Clippers beating the Lakers in that game in Los Angeles for the Battle of LA. I think we'll learn about a lot about the Lakers in the next few weeks because they are playing a very competitive schedule. As you can see, they're playing the Clippers. But currently, right now, I'm just going to take the Clippers because they are a way better team. Moving on to number 3, we're going to have another interesting matchup in the Western Conference. The Nuggets going to San Francisco and playing the Golden State Warriors, who have played a lot better as of late. It feels like a trap game to me for the Denver Nuggets. Golden State has been playing really well. They play decent at home. I think the crowd will be rocking for that one in Golden State. I think Curry will have one of his iconic games. Kuminga will have a good game. I think the Warriors, as I said, have played really, really well. Nuggets can't win all of them. So I'm going to take the Warriors. I think they're going to have a very good second half of the season. They're not playing I don't think they're playing this super hard schedule Golden State is. But I think if they have I think this Nuggets game will be a morale booster. I think it'll give them an edge that they really need, especially if they beat the Los Angeles Lakers tonight, which is currently going on as I record this. Then they got Charlotte, and then if they beat Denver, they'll be on a 4-game winning streak. That's a big morale booster there. If the Warriors can get that, look out for Golden State. And I'm going to take the Warriors because I still believe in Stephen Curry, the greatest shooter God ever created. Now let's move on to number 2, on a matchup in the Garden. Garden as in Madison Square Garden, not the TD Garden, but it is the team from TD Garden going to Madison Square Garden, the best team in the league. Boston playing the New York Knicks. In this one, this was the first game of the season for both these teams. It was the Knicks hosting Boston. It was an absolutely incredible game. It was a close game, and Boston got the job done in New York. In their first game of the regular season for both teams, Boston won that one. And because New York is not healthy, I'm going to take the Celtics, but I still expect Jalen Brunson. I still expect that New York Knicks crowd to be rocking on ABC, on national television, primetime 8:30 game in Madison Square Garden. It will be rocking, but because the Knicks are not healthy, I'm going to take the Boston Celtics. And number one, we have our NBA Finals rematch in Denver this week with the Miami Heat playing Denver. Denver will be on a back-to-back in that game. Miami will not. They and Miami has a little bit of injuries now with Terry Rozier being out, Josh Richardson being out. They did sign DeLon Wright, which I didn't really talk about as it happened literally while I was shooting the podcast last week. But DeLon Wright, I think, makes a decent impact for the Miami Heat, especially on the defensive side of the ball, especially with Josh Richardson being out. I think he's a perfect Heat culture player. His brother Darrell Wright played with the Heat for a little bit in that Dwayne Wade Shaq era. I think he's always wanted to play for Miami, and I think it's a really good fit for both parties, and I think will make an impact immediately for them. So I think that's a really good pickup for Miami. But going back to this game, Miami's not really healthy. Even though Denver's on a second night to a back-to-back, I think the game will be interesting. Miami will make the game interesting, but I am going to go with the result that happened in the finals. And I'm going to take the defending champs in that one, Denver Nuggets over the Miami Heat, in my number one game, the finals rematch. And that is all the time I have for you today. Thank you so much for watching the show. Remember, please follow on Instagram at take underscore your underscore shot underscore podcast underscore. Again, that's at take underscore your underscore shot underscore podcast underscore, and tell me how you would have taken your shots on these takes. That's all my shots for the week. See you next week when we get right back into NBA action this week. Hope you enjoy the NBA this week, and we will be back very, very soon. Thank you again so much for watching the Take Your Shot podcast, and peace out.